Jamie, you ready?
Ready.
Welcome, everyone, to the Culinary Now podcast. I'm Matt Britt.
And I'm Jamie Schick.
And today on the pod, we're joined by Felicity Cloake, who is a writer specializing in food or drink for The Guardian and the author of 7 books, as well as Matthew Cockerill, who is the CEO and founder of CKBK, an online cookbook library. Fellas, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Well, we are so excited to have you on. And Matt and I are huge cookbook collectors. We have like almost libraries in our house of cookbooks and all books on food and beverage. So I want to start by having you talk about the importance of cookbooks, both then and now.
I will start just because I write a column for The Guardian called How to Make the Perfect, and been doing this for 12 years. And the format of the column is that I take maybe 5 or 6 different recipes for a single dish, like say ragu bolognese or bread and butter pudding or shrimp and grits or whatever. It can be from anywhere. And I try these different recipes and I try and work out what works about the recipes and what doesn't, and then put them all together into a single so-called perfect recipe, or rather my perfect version of it. So I have an enormous cookbook library. I'm always adding to it, even though I live in a really tiny flat in central London. And the more that I do it, the more I realize what value there is in actual cookbooks, whether they're physical cookbooks or digitized versions of books that have been published, as opposed to internet recipes. And that's a very rich resource, but it's very, very different for me from cookbook and the cookbook tradition. So I find them incredibly valuable, and they play a huge physical part of my life.
So also, like Felicity, I have a huge cookbook collection. I originally was working in science publishing rather than food, but a very keen cook, had a large cookbook collection, and really did find it strange that this whole area with really high quality food content did just stay so much on the shelf and in print form and didn't have an online existence. And what was interesting in the early days of thinking about what could be done about this and what kind of project we could do was talking to different groups, food writers and chefs, and all seeing how actually really important cookbooks remained and now are to all these different people working with food. I mean, I thought in the first instance, even though my brother's a chef, I thought chefs maybe, hey, or we don't use recipes so much, or we get our experience hands-on. And those things are all important, but so many chefs, when we asked them, just wanted to tell us, about how many, literally thousands of cookbooks they owned, and how passionate they were about their favorite 10 books, and how, for example, if they had a new chef coming on board or apprentices, whatever, they would say, you have to get a copy of Saulnier's Le Répertoire de la Cuisine from it's 90 years old or whatever. And it's like this influence of cookbooks and how it continues really struck me. And so it seemed really important to say, how can we bring these into the digital world?
So
it's like you're in our heads.
Yeah, it's interesting because you both said very important things, but Felicity, I'm going to go off on one thing you mentioned, which is, sort of the difference between print or cookbooks and internet recipes. And this is something that Jamie and I both spend a lot of time in our classrooms talking about, is the importance to go beyond, whether it be all recipes or whatever the first thing you hit when you type into Google to find a recipe. And can you kind of go into a little bit about how, in your experience, chefs have used cookbooks, as Matt mentioned, like those 5 or 10 important books, to really develop their own sort of philosophy or their own sort of style? I know your column kind of speaks to narrowing down the best of certain things. Have you seen this in action in real life, in industry, where chefs are taking books and using them to create their own style?
It was a great surprise to me the first time that a professional chef came up to me and said, I love your tiramisu recipe or your go and fish curry recipe. And, actually I've adapted it for use in my restaurant, etc. And I was just blown away, because I am someone with absolutely no culinary training. I am a writer first and foremost who happens to be very greedy, which is how I got into the food world. But to hear that actually they were using my recipes and using them as jumping off points, or someone did say to me, actually, a tiramisu, we decided that we couldn't improve it. So that's what we serve in our restaurant, which is a very sort of hip London Italian small plates restaurant. I was just blown away by that. So it showed me that I had an idea of cookbooks in general being something for the domestic cook, whereas actually professionals do use them. And I think probably they use them more as inspiration rather than a manual, whereas the home cook would probably see them more as, this is, I'm going to follow them step by step. I will worry if I can't get, ground coriander as opposed to coriander seeds and etc. I will take them as a Bible, whereas obviously a professional chef can use them in a little bit more of a plastic way to suit their own ideas and influences. But I found it very interesting because previous to getting into this job, I hadn't realized that cookbooks played such a big part in professional kitchens. I suppose probably there's a difference. There's maybe been a difference with the rise of the self-taught chef as well. People like Heston Blumenthal, who didn't go to culinary school and are very proud of the fact that they sort of taught themselves to cook, often from cookbooks, and then went into the professional kitchen. And I think that became more and more doable in the last years of the 20th century. And that also plays a part. There aren't people that are coming up from the age of sort of 16 and learning the trade in the kitchen. They're people that just love food, as Matt was saying, and are interested in the craft, but learn it from books rather than at the stove.
Something I heard really recently at a chef, talking to chefs who are involved in education, was that they point their students to books, but they make very clear, read all these stuff, dig into these recipes, and then close the book. And that then they're not suggesting that they cook exactly that with exactly those measurements right from the book, but absolutely that they should absorb different ideas, different recipes, and take that from to improve their own cooking. And the other thing I was going to say is that I do think there's an interesting difference in general between the sort of book written by a professional chef as a cookbook, and there's a wide variety, some for their fellow chefs, some for education, some very much explicitly for the home cook. And then there are food writers who write in a more literary style, perhaps. But there's really interesting crossovers. I mean, Yosumoto Lengi is very popular with both groups. But also, I always was struck by Alistair Little, who ran these really successful high-end restaurants in London. But when he started his first restaurant, he didn't know how to cook. He was self-taught, and he just built the menu from Elizabeth Davis' French provincial cooking. And the further he got through the book, the more extensive the menu became. So yeah, it's really kind of interesting how cookbooks play a role for chefs and for others as well.
I would say.
Go right ahead, Felicity.
I just wanted to say that as from a practical point of view, when I see a cookbook by a professional chef, little alarm bells sometimes go off in my head, because having also worked on the editing side in food media, I know from experience that quite often these books, and not always, there are some brilliant examples of books, from the likes of Yotam, for example, which are designed with the home cook in mind and recipes that are for the home cook. But sometimes they're sort of an extension of promotion for the restaurant, or they're just, they're coffee table books for diners who have enjoyed eating that restaurant. They're not really intended for most people to follow at home. And the recipes have been scaled down, and you'll get to it and you'll think, oh, I can do this, and then you realize you need to turn to page 50 for this demi-glace recipe, and that one for dehydrated strawberry powder, and you do not have the 4 days it actually takes to make this stuff, let alone the 10 kilos of veal bones. So I love those books, but I don't often cook from really sort of restaurant style cookbooks.
I think that's a perfect way to sum it up, actually, because as I mentioned, we have tons of books, and there are books like that. You're right that there's so many multiple steps that I think for someone like the home cook, that's not going to be feasible. So this kind of brings me to my question for Matthew. You co-founded CKBK, which we're going to talk a little bit about. And I'm curious what kind of inspired you to create this digital cookbook platform, which appeals to all types of cooks, whether they're professional, they're home cooks, they're students. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that platform.
Great. Yeah. So I think the thing which struck me was that cookbooks in their physical form are just addictive and work really well on lots of ways. You get this sort of serendipity of flicking through, you kind of beautiful presentation and pictures, and there's always something kind of new, so you don't get stuck in a rut. But on the other hand, there are just so many ways in which they are also limited by those physical constraints. I mean, a crazy example, just added a CIA baking and pastry mastering the art book. Now, it's like 3.8 kilos. It's like 1,100 pages. This is a massive thing. It's not an easy thing. You're not going to take it with you on holiday kind of thing. So clearly having access to a large library, but just from your pocket, transforms things a lot. The other really straightforward thing is you just frequently say, I've got this ingredient, I've just been growing something in my garden and it's perfectly fresh. What can I do with it? And maybe, there's this other thing. Is there anything which combines those two things? Now, figuring out what the best options are for a combination of ingredients from your books on your shelf is just really hit and miss and a lot of work. But if you just drop those things into a search engine, you suddenly have a wide range of options, and then you can maybe filter it according to, maybe I'll try something Asian, or maybe I want something spicy, or maybe, all those different ideas. And that's the kind of thing which a print book doesn't do so well. And so when we work with publishers, it's not about saying, hey, you're old school and you need to this is the new way, we're going to get rid of the print and do this digital. It's like there are things which digital does well, which print doesn't do so well, and vice versa. So if you're going to work with authors and create really great content, let's figure out how to use online and print to work together well. Another example, which is where we get a lot of enthusiasm specifically from the authors, is that the digital channel. I mean, when you do a printed book, you kind of have to do lots of legwork going around promoting it, maybe doing book signings, just going to bookshops. But there's a real limit to how much you can actually engage with your readers. Whereas with a platform like Cookbook, anytime someone posts a recipe review, there's a notification system, and the authors love to receive these notifications about questions on recipes. Maybe people have found a tiny inconsistency between the ingredients and the method. And so there's lots of that two-way interaction going on, which is just, again, something which doesn't work in print. So, yeah, it
That's
was
amazing.
Desire to say, let's not let our sort of fear of the digital future get in the way of making the most of it, because I had the same experience in my previous background in science publishing. There are so many opportunities for digital to make new things possible, but the existing traditional publishers there were like, but what's going to happen to this and what's going to happen to that, and maybe it will, all these problems with peer review. And so we just had to be a new venture there saying, hey, let's just see what happens, see how it works. And eventually what we did there, developing an open access model, that worked really well, and the other people followed. And I think what we're trying to do here with Cookbook is bring together like-minded publishers and authors and agents. We have a lot of support from the authors' agents who see, for example, that the way a traditional publishing system works tends to be, hey, publish a new book, and then it'll be on sale in the shops for a couple of years, but pretty much it disappears after that, goes out of print, unavailable, the author doesn't get any more royalties. And something which is really good about building a digital platform, and whether that's Spotify or Netflix or Cookbook, is that the stream of royalties go back to the creator indefinitely. As long as people are watching that or cooking those recipes and using that. We have books like The Silver Palette, which are being accessed on Cookbook. We have books by Marcella Hazan. And these are just books which have long-term value, and people will keep on cooking them. And as long as they keep on cooking from them and using them on Cookbook, that continues to reward the creator.
Okay, so many questions. So many questions came up right there. So number one, Matt, you got a little bit of my heart there when you talked about the weight of the CIA book, because as someone who went to CIA and had to schlep around the Pro Chef every day, it is a beast. So I can see advantages, and all the advantages you talk about, I completely agree with, to going digital. But harkening back a little bit to something Felicity said about these sort of coffee table books, my question for you is, how do you capture, I see the benefit of having recipes from these huge texts at your disposal digitally in the blink of an eye. How do you get, let's say, any book from Phaidon, who I love, I think that they do a great job, but any book from that publisher who is very philosophical, very sort of coffee table, how do you capture that digitally? Because those books really are not meant to, as Felicity mentioned, they're not mentioned to be replicated verbatim in the kitchen. They're meant to inspire sort of ethos within a cook. How do you capture that digitally?
So one idea I have there, this is an ongoing conversation. So we don't have every publisher on board yet. And Phaidon, and who also work, for example, with Modernist Cuisine, who you may know as well, the ultimate example of a multi-doorstop book. They see that one of the challenges is will see the role of the book as being this kind of coffee table inspiration, and almost surprised that people kind of are interested in cooking from the recipes. But we know actually there are chefs, whether it's like the French Laundry book by Thomas Keller, really they want to get into the details with the recipes. Not every reader wants to do that, but there is a subset of the audience who do. Now, the model with Modernist Cuisine, for example, is there is an implicit recognition that the two use cases are a bit different, and the format which works best is different. So actually, Modernist Cuisine is 5 volumes that comes with a kitchen manual, which doesn't have all the big photos and is smaller format and is much more practical, and you don't mind so much if it gets a bit stained with all the cooking in the kitchen. And so creating a digital version is the same thing. It doesn't need to and shouldn't try to exactly replicate the coffee table experience. The question is, can it be something useful so you can search, flick through, and have with you and say, what was that particular way of doing that sous vide salmon that I really liked that was mentioned in this book? And yet you were maybe inspired by it by flicking through and looking at the coffee table, but to be able to get to the details of exactly what temperature, what time, and with what herbs you should use, then that's where digital is great.
I mean, that's awesome. Like, I think that that's the exact response that I wanted to hear, but like, I feel like it's great that that's sort of in the mindset of these publishers that are doing that work and coming on. You mentioned a benefit of being digital as a way to maybe capture books that would maybe go out of print, right? And one of the books that I have, it took me forever to find it, and it was uber expensive, and I think it's perfect, is like the Jean-Louis Paladin book, Cooking with the Seasons. Very hard to find, very inspirational for anyone. I mean, I'm a DC guy, so I identify with him. How has Cookbook sort of worked to capture some of these older texts that maybe are going out of print?
It's a really good question, and it is something
Thank
which
you.
has occupied me personally, and also my co-founder and the team here. But I've done a lot on this over several years. I mean, going back to quite a while, and it's detective work. But partly there is not just about figuring out who to contact and where to track down these books, but also which are the books which have had that influence. And so we did this project called 1,000 Cookbooks, which I touched on before, where we asked leading chefs and other food writers what were the 10 books from any era that influenced them. And so to give an example, if I remember right, Julie Rosso, who wrote The Silver Palette, she actually cites, along with quite a number of other people, a book from more than 50 years ago called The Auberge of the Flowering Hearth by Roy Andrews de Groot, who was a blind but sort of celebrity food writer in New York. And he went and traveled to the south of France in search of the place in the hills where chartreuse was made by monks. But he stopped at this particular place, and what he discovered there in terms of these 2 old ladies who were running this inn and cooking this regional food, he just captured that, and it was inspirational. So having heard from a few different people about that book, set out on a mission to figure out, well, he died long ago. What's happened to that book? And eventually we managed to track down a descendant who had the rights and was eager to tell the story as well. And it turned out to be a fascinating story of the trip and the research that went on and the assistant that went with him. The 2 parts to it are, firstly, getting those recommendations, finding by asking people what books have influenced you, and discovering these somewhat less well-known, perhaps slightly forgotten now by the wider world, these books, but which are really interesting. And then doing this detective work to track down what's happened to the rights. Because I think in some of the other areas, like music, the sort of system of how rights are managed over the decades is more kind of mature, and there are standard systems. All recording artists tend to participate in certain things. when it comes to books, it's just a mess. I mean, there's just everything's broken down by different regions, and when things go out of print, they sometimes come back into print with another publisher, and then the author can request the rights be reverted to them if it's out of print, but if they don't request it, it sits in a kind of limbo. The worst situation is the books, things which become completely orphans because they were a corporate work and the corporation ceases to exist because it gets kind of acquired and then reacquired and broken up, and there is literally no path and no one knows where the rights are. So, for example, with Time Life, there's a wonderful series, two series, The Good Cook and Foods of the World. They were published by Time Life, which is sort of long gone as an entity, and literally, I'd say essentially no one knows. No one has enough confidence to know where the rights are to bring those books together online, which is such a shame because they're a classic example. They've got they were huge budget. They had the top food writers of the time contributing to them, and they occupy like 3 feet of shelf space. And they would just be really great to have in a searchable form. So we still hope one day to find a way to do that.
Can I just say, as a book user, that is for me the sort of the cream on the top of the site, because there's so much stuff that I would never be able to find, even going to the British Library, which is a copyright library. It's only a copyright library for the UK and Ireland. And so finding stuff, you've got a lot of old American stuff there, all sorts of things in there that I just would never physically be able to get hold of. And that's what is it's really exciting to me. It's brilliant to have cookbooks that I've also got on the shelf there so I can search them. But to have something that's been out of print for 50 years is just incredible.
And it's even really well-known names. So Jeremiah Tower, his restaurant Stars in San Francisco, was huge. And, he's a fantastic guy. I was lucky enough to meet him at a showing of his sort of biopic in the Oxford Literary Festival. And as a result of that, we were able to get essentially his whole back catalogue onto Cookbook, and also from his pastry chef, Emily Lucetti. And these are just great books. They're just a bit older than the current publishing system would like to make available to you. And it always seems to me really strange that it's like as if in the music industry we said, well, we've got all this great music now. Who needs the Beatles or the Rolling Stones? We've moved on. And it's like, that would be a bit crazy. And similarly, it would be crazy to not bring along all this great culinary work, which everything builds on. I mean, I was lucky enough to go on a few occasions to El Bulli, and nothing's influenced me more and struck me more than how El Bulli built on and sort of paid homage to the traditional cuisines of all over the world and respect for ingredients, and then was incredibly creative on the basis of that deep understanding. And that was only possible through bringing this together. And that was a huge influence to me to say this is an area of culture which has not actually had the respect it deserves from the sort of the established systems we have in many other areas around music and art. It's like there are all these resources and historic archives dedicated to bringing material together, and that although there are cookbook libraries which exist, which basically are when someone with a big cookbook library leaves them to a university, those universities kind of keep them in a dusty room. But there's more to it than that. To actually bring together and preserve the world's food culture, you should be doing more than that. And I think that's one of our goals. Part of our mission is to say, can we bring all of this culinary culture and preserve it and make it useful and make it so future generations can be inspired by it.
I love that. I love that we've been talking about preserving out of print books, about preserving like kind of the past and what we can learn from it. But Felicity, I really want to ask you about the future and what you see for trends in cookbooks, whether it's topics or layouts or whether they're print or digital going forward. What are some things that you think we're going to start to see?
Something that I've already noticed is this sort of hyper regionalization of cookbooks, certainly in the UK, but I think more widely. I ordered a book a couple of weeks ago from the States called I Am From Here by a chap called Vishwesh Bhatt, who is Indian born, who now lives in the South somewhere. And it's the kind of book where I know that a lot of people who say maybe from a place where there's not historically been a lot published in English, sometimes feel that they're pigeonholed into only writing about that cuisine. And actually, he's a chef. He wants to write about his, he lives in the South. He's now from the South, and he wants to write about the food he cooks. So there are chapters on corn and okra, which is of course also eaten in India, but it's a very southern book, but incorporating Indian influences. I think that kind of focus on the cuisine of somewhat an individual or a family or a small community is something we're going to be seeing more of, because people are genuinely interested. They've seen the big picture. They don't want one huge book that covers the cuisine of the United States or India. They want to know what people in a specific region, they want to sort of drill down beyond the surface. They want to know what they're eating. So that's definitely a trend I've seen. I still don't think that I think that print cookbooks have a very healthy future, because it's much as I love getting recipes in digital format, as we've discussed with the searchable function, etc., I still prefer reading in an actual book, and we're seeing more and more cookbooks that have that story attached, and people's either their own story or their research in there. And it's very hard to put that in an ebook. It doesn't work in the same way. You can't illustrate it. You don't want to read it in bed. And so I think that these kind of more discursive cookbooks are certainly a trend that's going to continue. And I see a bright future for printed cookbooks. I'll be honest. I'm just looking at a pile that is about as high as my hip that's sitting by my desk, and that is just the stuff that has come in the last couple of months. So
that makes me so happy to hear.
Well, I think it's important because what we're talking about here is the success of both, right? We're talking about how print still has a viable future, but how digital opens the doors to so many other things. And I think that whether it's saving lost cookbooks, but something you mentioned about a trend on hyper regional, which I agree, and I see that all the time. Cookbooks are becoming more granular, right? They're becoming more niche. I think one of the challenges and one of the areas maybe I think digital could help, I don't know if it does, so Matt, you'd have to weigh in on this, is when I'm reading a book from an Indian chef in India, or someone who even is from the American South, which is, 3 hours by plane from me, I can't find all those ingredients at my local store. So I see digital maybe being an opportunity. And I think I've seen this online where they've connected like links to where you can purchase those ingredients. Matt, is that something digital can provide solutions for?
Yeah, so we definitely see one of our roles to reduce the barriers to people exploring a bit more widely. And obviously, one of the main ones, especially if you don't live in an area. I mean, I'm pretty lucky in London. We have lots of different ethnic cuisine kind of grocers and places you can go if you know where to go to find really good ingredients. But it's not always so easy. So, yeah, we want to help people to connect. And there are lots of good sites which have specialist ingredients. But we want to make that as easy as possible. So what we already have right now is integrations with Instacart and Amazon Fresh. And that's not perfect. It's not the whole. It's not completely specialist, but it does make it easier to get quite a wide range. They both have wider range than your typical local supermarket of unusual ingredients. And I think that longer term, to be able to handle, we do work with specialists, right? We do promotions working with specialist ingredient providers. I think that's one of the areas, because it shouldn't be that the only way to try out interesting foods is to go with a meal kit provider with all of the kind of packaging and the kind of everything being paint by numbers. I mean, it's fine, but it's like it's not the whole experience of cooking and getting to know ingredients. And so I think that if we can make it easier to say, I'm really kind of liking the look of this Tibetan food, how can I start doing that? And maybe there's this interesting ingredient there. We have a really cool cookbook called Taste Tibet, and it's full of great things. But there may be one or two ingredients there where you're like, oh, how can I get this?
Yeah, I mean, I think about, like, we just did an episode a few weeks ago, or a few episodes ago, on how disappointing American supermarkets can be. And so England is probably a little bit different just because of the strong Indian influence there. But like, I think about like Nigella seeds. Like, I can't find those in American supermarkets. So like being able to have a resource to find those easier might help me elevate a recipe that, is somewhat incomplete without them.
And conversely, trying to find Mexican and Hispanic ingredients in the UK is a whole different story compared to the US.
Yeah, I have avocados aplenty here in the U.S., so we can do a trade. We can do a trade.
On the future of cookbooks, just another thing I was thinking. Things are changing about what type of cookbook gets published or who gets to publish cookbooks, because publishers now do look for different things. It's like, do you have a following? And obviously there are opportunities to practice your craft in a way and create content prior to having a cookbook deal. So I think a lot of the new cookbooks which we see are coming from people who have been working on a particular theme and building up a following online. And, that changes how things work. And there can be some upsides and some downsides to that. But I think it's definitely a shift in how things are going. And also, sometimes that's curating video content too. And so one of the things we can do is help bring together the recipes, the video, again, all kind of in one place in your pocket. So we're doing more of that kind of work where we are integrating not just the book, but also associated videos. So you have from the author who's also a video content creator.
I think that's amazing to have that interaction and have it be interactive with the user, because a lot of times I know from teaching that our students really love to both read it and they love to see it. Like they like both forms of getting information. And that kind of leads me to wondering, where do you see cookbook fitting into culinary education and student use in the classroom?
Yeah, that's been a really interesting area. My background is academic publishing, but this wasn't an area where there was an established kind of culture of having real digital resources. I discovered that culinary students are often told, get a copy of this one book. And at the CIA, it's Professional Chef, I think. And in the UK, there's a book called Practical Cookery. And it's almost like, okay, well, yeah, this is the best we can do is give you this book. But actually, you realize that's a kind of strange way to have access to the kind of background, the equivalent, the sort of research library, the context to be able to dig in. If you're going to do a project, you want to be able to do some research across a wide range of material. And yeah, what we've discovered is once both faculty and students start thinking about it and start exploring and realizing what's possible, they definitely are asking the question, oh my God, what have we been missing here? Because so much more is possible. So we're gradually getting this adoption from more and more culinary schools and then also more general academic organizations, because it's not literally that food books and cookbooks and reference works related to food and cooking are solely relevant if you are hands-on in the kitchen. There are so many other areas of cultural history, of kind of international studies of various types, anthropology, nutrition, sports science, where actually this food and culinary material is really relevant. We've been working very closely, for example, with Le Cordon Bleu, with the Institute of Culinary Education, and in many cases, as with the CIA, some of these teaching organizations are also creators of cookbook content. So there's a natural fit there. So yeah, this is a very active area for us, developing these relationships with academia and with culinary schools.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I guess just in the sake of time, because I know we're in a time difference now, I want to kind of round this out and talk about just what books inspire you. I mean, as someone who has their fingertips, Felicity, you mentioned you have a stack of books. Like, I'm tempted to ask you to turn your camera, but like you have a stack of books next to you. Like, are there any books that you go back to over and over again that have had that influence, or is there something that's like coming out that you kind of have a sneak peek to that you're really excited about and you think is going to move the needle cookbook wise?
I mean, there are certainly books that I come back to again and again, and I try not to, just because you don't want the same people featuring
Sure.
every week in the column. But there are some that I think genuinely, had they not been published, then something would have been lost to the world. There's a book which, I mean, it's pretty niche for in Britain, so I doubt they will have made it across the States, but it's a 1932 book called Good Things in England, which might make a few American listeners laugh at the idea of any good things in English cuisine. But it's a collection of basically recipes from predominantly housewives, cooks, home cooks. And it's all sort of food recipes that would have been lost because they were the kind of thing that they weren't going to be publishing cookbooks of the era. They weren't French food, they weren't sort of avant-garde, take an alligator pear and etc. They were, cakes and pies and all the things you think of when you think of British food. And had she not have collected them and she got people to send them in from the late 1920s until 1932 when the book was published, then they certainly would have been lost forever. It's such an incredible resource. And I think that is one of my favourite cookbooks of all time. I once made a fruit cake that I think was made for George the Third's wedding. It weighed about 3 stone. I won't be repeating it, but I'm really glad that we've got that recipe preserved for all time. I'm a real food geek, so I love any kind of nerdy historical or very niche book. I'm in there. I spend a lot of time on secondhand book sites and in charity shops, like buying older books. And I would love them to go digital just so they could be available to more people who are less nerdy than I am about these cookbooks.
Wow. Matt, what about you? Is there anything that's, just sort of sticks out for you?
Yeah, there are some books which are like the equivalent of the Citizen Kane of the cookbook world. And so when we did our top 1,000 list, we just kind of got this kind of pattern. And it was a little bit split between the US and the UK and the rest of the world. And overall, it ended up almost being a tie between 2 books at the top, one very British book and one very US book. And that was Nose to Tail Eating by Fergus Henderson.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
St. John, love it. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of always compare that a little bit to the Velvet Underground. It didn't necessarily have the biggest sales at the time, but my God, has it had an influence, and have the people who've been through that restaurant gone on to start their own restaurants. That's really key. And then in the US, Mastering the Art of French Cooking just, is an iconic book.
Right.
In terms of what kind of has made a difference to me and the books I kept going back to, that, books back in my formative years, which have also been really high up our list in our top 25 books, would be Nigella Lawson's How to Eat, which is really striking even at the time by not having a single picture in it, but just having her voice, which just makes you want to cook the thing so much, and everything in it being so kind of just good, including, strange and silly things like ham and Coca-Cola. But again, it really works. And then you kind of use the stock to make a Mexican soup afterwards. It's just a fantastic book. And then also Morrow, the cookbook, which actually has finally become available in an ebook version. So that's soon going to be on Cookbook as well. And that just presaged the whole influence of kind of North African and Middle Eastern kind of tastes into and it's just, again, had this massive influence, but is also just a really good book. And I suppose those are a bit older books. The more recent book that I really keep going back to is Daniel Golmish is sort of a chef who's been such a big supporter of what we've been doing, but I discovered his book specifically, the new book, French Countryside Cooking, which he wrote during the pandemic, is just really unusual it's a chef's book, but he just really cares about making it work for you in the kitchen. And so there's tiny details about how he explains it and what he does, and also how everything is just interesting enough to be worth doing and not just the standard way you would do it, but not so complex like Felicity was saying. It's like, oh, am I going to have to dehydrate those strawberries 3 days ago in order to be able to make this? And so, yeah, I love Daniel's books because everything in it, people say, oh, when did you make this before? And I'm like, I've never made it before. It just works. And they just don't believe it. And it's true. That is an impressive thing for a book. If you can just pick it up, cook something, and it works really well.
So I'm so those are all fantastic.
That's actually kind of shocking that you're impressed when something works from a book. Like you'd think there would be a process behind it, but
well, I just have to say, the fact that the Fergus Henderson reference, like that resonates strongly with me because in the States, we've seen so many people take up the mantle on nose to tail cooking. And I'm not saying it started at St. John, but that was obviously one of the most notable sort of beginnings of the modern movement. And I go back a little bit to that book inspiring just April Bloomfield and her work with A Girl and a Pig, which is probably an underrated cookbook, but something that has significant teeth and it should be celebrated as much just because of its just connection to purity. And I think that those books, Whole Beast is a fantastic book. So that I would say that I agree with that, but I agree with all those choices. They're fantastic. So I think that's it. Thank you guys, ladies, so much for taking the time and sharing all your knowledge on
Yes,
cookbooks.
thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
check out CKBK, right?
Matt, thanks for inviting us on, and do check out CKBK. Absolutely.
Matt, you want to give us like a little plug here, like what anything they should specifically know about or checking out the site?
You can get it on the App Store, you can get it on Google Play, or you can just visit ckbk.com. And there's a free 14-day trial, so try it out, no risk.
And Felicity, where can they find your articles?
I am on the Guardian website every week, and you can also find me at Felicity Cloake on Instagram and Twitter, and etc. etc.
Follow them.
Perfect.
Thank you. Be well. So I just have to say real fast before we stop recording, I'm going to end it, obviously, but like the digital option, like of videos, is so important because I go back. Like the one thing I watch, like when I'm in bed, which drives my wife crazy, is like Great Chefs of the World, which you can only find on YouTube, which is so European, but it's such an influence. So if I don't know if you catalog those, but like that's awesome. Like that's is so inspiring to so many people.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Well, I also think that the integration of being able to be like, hey, this didn't work for me, and you can almost interact with the author, I think is really valuable too, because getting that feedback, being like, oh, this is what I meant, 'cause maybe there's like a language barrier, or it didn't translate, or it didn't work the first time. And I think being able to have that immediate feedback, it's almost like being in a culinary kitchen, right? Where they can be like, chef, this didn't work, what happened? And you can kind of troubleshoot. So I think that's kind of a really valuable piece to the platform as well, as to be able to have that interaction and for clarification.
100%. There's not like a simple just say how to do it and it's done, because ingredients vary depending on where you are in the world. Cookers vary. I actually really love, there's a hollandaise recipe in one of, I think it might be James Peterson's book, or maybe it's another of our professional books, but it has like a great list of like a dozen ways something as simple as hollandaise can just go not quite right. And it's brilliant. And it's like, this is what I need. You know, it's really specific about all the different ways it might not quite be as good as it could be.
We didn't talk about it, but it sounds like it goes hand in hand with culinary education. Like it enhances it, but I feel like it will just work seamlessly. We should talk to someone about this, Matt.
Yeah, I know. Listen, I heard you drop listen, I will definitely, I'll drop your name next time I'm in a meeting with someone who makes decisions at the university. So
great stuff.
All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy. I know it's the evening. Bye.
Bye.